Is definitely the Chinese Grand Prix circuit. It's actually our producer who threw us a bit of a wobbly there because he just wanted to see if we actually pay attention. So, well, we picked it up quite quickly. And if you read carefully at the top of the stand there, those Chinese letters actually say Sinopec. So I learned a bit of Chinese when I was there. Watching some of the highlights from Prix Practice 1, going into one of the turns there, Ralf Schumacher. Gary, a track notoriously difficult, a lot of very, very long straights and then very, very hard on the brakes.
Yeah, it is definitely, and obviously, what's making life a little bit more difficult for the drivers. If you just see Ralf Schumacher losing it there under braking, because the track is not used that often, as you said, and still needs time to get some rubber laid down onto it and actually develop grip as the weekend goes on.
Pedro de la Rosa coming into turn one. This is like a full apex kind of corner. You've got to really get this, go tight on the inside, then let the car drift out, Gary. I mean, from a driving perspective, you really have to concentrate a lot in that sequence of bends.
You do, and the car needs to be set up really well to take a handle a corner like that, because you're obviously braking, you're turning, you're doing everything at the same time, which you're not supposed to be doing, which makes it extremely difficult to keep overall grip on the car and actually get it through. Then you can see the final bit of it, you have to really slow the car down in all and then get it turned into the right hand of it. So very, very difficult, nice and challenging for all the drivers and teams to get the car set up for.
Well, we mentioned Japanese Grand Prix, might as well say it again, in the Chinese Grand Prix. Big Pedro de la Rosa doing a sterling job.
Well, Pedro de la Rosa has had a brilliant track record this year, a fantastic third driver or reserve driver, whichever way you want to call it. Does unbelievable work for the McLaren team, and it's so important, in terms of this track. As we say again, the track is green. Remember, these teams have to choose their tyres for the rest of the weekend. What is the tyre we're going to be for as the track rubbers in? Is it going to get lessed? And in terms of the actual Michelin runners, it was quite interesting because there was not a big difference between the prime and the option tyre in terms of performance. So it's going to be a very difficult choice for these teams. You
say that on the Michelin. The Ryan Carthen for Jordan came out as well, Gary, saying that they've also got a very difficult decision to make, and they would have made that decision now already for third and fourth free practice tomorrow and qualifying in the race. He also said that it's quite a difficult decision as to which tyre is going to be better for them.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult. They only had these two sessions to really work it out and see what. And we just mentioned the track does change and evolve as the weekend goes on as well. So you've got to be. Sometimes it is a bit of a gamble as to which tyre you want to choose, and obviously you want to get to the end of the race. You don't want to have chosen the softer tyre or the harder tyre for that matter. That's not going to get to the end of the race.
And also, I suppose we've got to take weather into consideration as well, Vic. We're not too sure what the weather temperature is. Let's have a listen to Fernando Alonso's team radio.
Okay, 10-11. Okay, mate, that's turn 11. We'll do a pit stop back in please. We'll do another one. Can we have SLS P5, please, mate? That's turn 14 you're in.
Alonso doing installation lap, peeling off into the pit lane. And we haven't had the team radios for a good few races now. It's great to see it's back. Perhaps maybe the facilities of China just lends itself a little bit better. You also notice on the track quite undulating, quite a lot of camber corners as well.
Yeah, it really makes the track very hard from an engineering perspective. We've seen that there's 15 turns on the circuit, and a very, very important one is the turn right at the end of the main straight, going down. I think they reach about 330 k's an hour, and then they break into a very, very tight hairpin. That's going to be the biggest issue in terms of tyre wear this weekend.
Ricardo Zonta also finding life a little bit difficult. Battled quite a bit in the first session today, but came good in the second session. But also a man who's done a great job. But unfortunately, we've seen, Gary, that with this Toyota, we saw it in Japan, Ralf Schumacher's pole position really flattered the team, unfortunately. They seem to be great with no fuel, but as soon as they got fuel on board, they just cannot get any pace. And they've got a very strong engine.
That's right, and they've got to get the chassis to work with it. And you can see they've really thrown everything at it this year. They came out, they've developed, and this car's evolved. They've got B-spec cars and so on. Right up until now, the last Grand Prix of the race, just developing and trying to get this car right. But yeah, it's right, low fuel, the car has been quick, and that's why we've seen Zonta at the head of the timesheets. in many of the Friday practice sessions all through the year. But it's quite clearly, like you said, when the car is on a fuel load, it hasn't got the pace at all. Or in fact, it can't even keep whatever pace it has for the race distance either.
Watching Ralf Schumacher was 2/10 down on Pedro de la Rosa's time into the first sector, coming up to sector 2, one of the BARs in front of them. Crosses over, he's lost half a second. Vic, also a massive milestone in Formula One. This is the last Grand Prix with the current V10 engine.
Yeah, it's a massive milestone, but interestingly enough, Renault have brought a new E-spec engine. Honda have obviously got a very high-spec engine for their drivers as well. So teams are developing right until the end. There's 2 separate teams doing this sort of development, and it's a bit of a shame, but I suppose it was the same when the V12s went away from Formula One. It's an evolving sport, and I think the biggest thing is that with the 2.4 litre V8s, which is effectively 2 cylinders taken off a 3 litre V10. If you work out the capacity, that's what the capacity is, a 2.4 litre V8. Just to hear the sound, because I think a Formula One car, more than how fast it is, it's the sound that goes through and reverberates when all the cars are lined up on the grid. The rumours that we're hearing already is that these V8s are revving to 21,000 RPM. So I think expect some spine-tingling sounds coming from these Formula One cars.
I think it really is going to be classic. Karthikeyan missing his brake points going into the hairpin. But man, also, I suppose, when you reflect and look back at his whole season, Gary, it started off very good. It sort of plateaued out, and I think a little bit too much pressure on him. But maybe Jordan or Midland next year keep him on.
Yeah, well, let's hope so for him. Any young driver, you don't want to have been there for 1 year, learnt all the circuits, learnt about F1, and then have to have gone and waste all the experience. But that's what that's the nature of the game. Only 1 or 2 of these new guys will stick around for next year. But I think when Trevor Carlin left the team, that's when we really sort of seen Karthikeyan battle, and I think he had a lot of support from him. After that, like you said, he just didn't have what it took, and Montero actually then started to develop and become the number 1 driver in the team.
Watching Rubens Barrichello, another milestone this weekend as well. 6 years at Ferrari, his last race for Ferrari before he moves over to Honda next year. Wants to go out with some kind of blaze of glory. I mean, unfortunately, both him and Michael Schumacher have not been given a strong enough car to challenge this year. But, you've got to believe that Rubens is going to do his utmost to try and finish on a high for Ferrari this weekend. Well,
I certainly think so. And remember, he won this race here last year. He should be quite fast at the track. The track maybe suits his driving style, very tight hairpins, high traction events. So I would expect Ferrari to be pretty good. Michael Schumacher in the coming through turn 14 at the moment. And I think in the last 2 races, we've seen Ferrari slowly start to pick up the pace. The cars become more competitive, not competitive with the McLarens and the Renaults, but it's certainly become the 3rd fastest car out there, which cements their position as 3rd in the constructor. So maybe we could be in for a Ferrari podium this weekend.
Well, that we're going to have to wait and see. Mario Thiessen checking out the weather conditions, maybe a couple of drops of rain. Another big milestone, the last Williams BMW race. Williams next year will be running Cosworth. Let's have a listen to the team radio again.
You've lifted off for about just by 10% or something on the main straight. Any problem there? Bump or something?
A big bump. We are touching a lot in this installation lap on that straight, all through the straight. So we have to check now in this run if it's too low. The car in front of the pressures are too low in the installation.
Felipe Massa, another milestone this weekend. Massa going to be his last race for Sauber. The last weekend for the Sauber Petronas team. There's been a lot of fanfare and celebration for Peter Sauber. 36 years in motorsport, Gary. I mean, the guy's achieved a phenomenal amount. 13 years in Formula One, a private independent team eventually has decided to give it away.
What happened, Felipe? Just my mistake.
Mistake, Gary. I mean, Peter Sauber, what an icon in Formula One.
And to keep his team going the way he has in this era where you really needed a manufacturer's support behind you. I think out of the privateer teams, it's just he's been consistent. If anything, he hasn't sort of had the success that maybe Jordan would have had, winning a couple of Grand Prix and so on. But he's always been there. And it's the kind of team that I think any young driver would love to have got into. Guys like Massa, Raikkonen, have been in this team, and I think Hartfeld as well, been allowed to develop their Formula 1 careers in reasonably competitive equipment and with a well-established and well-run team.
Just, I suppose, the one blemish on that is that they've never won a Grand Prix, and that's just really sad. I mean, they've been up there a couple of times, but they just never had that elusive win.
Yeah, they just never had the luck of the Irish, like Eddie Jordan had.
Exactly.
That's it. And but like I said, I think on certain Grand Prix here and there, they really deserved a good shot. We had Frentzen finishing on the podium a couple of years ago at Indianapolis, so there's been the odd flash there. But like I said, the team, it's never been a tail-end team, and I think that's what you really got to take your hat off to.
It's going to be sad to see Peter Sauber not on the pit wall. Maybe he'll be there in some kind of way.
Fernando, there's a tiny amount of rain. It's very, very light. It hasn't slowed anyone down, and it'll be gone very soon. So it shouldn't be a problem.
Alonso getting that talk from his team. 200ths up on Pedro de la Rosa's time.
Well, obviously the rain's not slowing him down because he's 200ths up on the time.
Yeah.
We'll just have to wait and see. But maybe he's. But it's nice to get your team engineers at pit wall communicating so much. Renault seem to use the team radio a much. Or maybe they're the only team that gives us the commentary. But at least it's very clear. It's you must say that their pit communication is easy. It's succinct, where the drivers can understand it. The drivers feed back to the engineers. You can see it's a well-oiled team.
Well, I would love to have heard the team engineers talking to Fisichella in the last 2 laps of Japan. That's what I would have liked to have heard last weekend. As you can see, very, very peculiar sort of weather conditions. Fernando Alonso has backed off quite significantly, lost 0.6 in that middle sector. Talking about others, BAR, Sauber, their last Grand Prix this weekend. Williams, BMW, they moving over. BMW buying Sauber. Also a very big weekend for Minardi.
Yeah, it is. As Minardi, we know, will be gone from the grid as well next year. And
it's like Fisichella.
Well, you probably didn't hear the warning about the rain, I suppose.
Well, they only spoke to Alonso. No, that's beached. He's not going to be going anywhere from there. But let's have a listen to what they've got to say.
I think switch off for 10. Yeah, switch off, mate, switch off.
Yeah, there we go, the end of that. But Minardi, also a team that has brought so much passion into Formula One. They've always been that struggling little independent team when it was owned by Giancarlo Minardi, then Paul Stoddart. But they have brought in some great drivers. Alonso's been there, Mark Webber's been there, Fisichella's been there, Trulli's been there. I mean, they really have been a sort of stepping stone for a lot of drivers.
Yeah, it certainly has. And it marks the end of an era, certainly, because you're not going to have teams like that in Formula One ever again. You've either got to be funded by a billionaire individual, as Red Bull are at this point in time, or a manufacturer. So, you really do see the face of F1, as we know, changing now and going on into a new era and into the future. Just sticking with the team radios, it is so important for the teams to be able to communicate properly. I know BAR, one of the teams that actually got such ex-British military personnel in and actually coached them on the radio that do speak in some sort of code. And just to keep everything short and simple, because obviously, with the noise and so on around there, you need to be able to communicate effectively and sharply without having to actually converse too much, because you're on the risk of the guys actually not hearing what's going on. It's super critical that these systems work well.
So it was about 15 minutes left of the session when Fisichella went out on board here with Kimi Räikkönen. Everyone battling into that hairpin.
Well, I think everybody's trying to find the brake marker, trying to find the limits in terms of braking, in terms of cornering, in terms of traction. So I think we will give everybody the chance in the first session to make the slight errors. But you'll find as the sessions wear on, as the days wear on, as qualifying comes through, and as the race comes through, these guys will hit their markers. They're basically learning the track all over again. The track has evolved since last year.
Sure. It has definitely changed. Vic, we also saw Juan Pablo Montoya's car very, very low with a lot of sparks coming off the bottom. So ride height seems to be a problem here as well.
Well, you see, in terms of the simulation, they will have made their decisions what sort of ride heights you want to run. In a Formula One car, or any Formula car for that matter, you want to run it as low as possible for the aero. But unfortunately, what sometimes happens is that maybe if the track has evolved over year on year, suddenly it has more grip. You exit the corner onto the straight faster than you had normally done. And then by the time you're reaching the end of the straight, you're making more downforce, the ride heights go lower, and then all of a sudden the car starts to bottom. And believe me, in a Formula car, and Gary can probably verify this, it's very uncomfortable when the board starts to hit at those sort of speeds. So you want to try and also lift it up, because when the board does hit, you lose all aerodynamic downforce as well.
We'll ask Gary about that in a second. Let's just have a look at the timing sheets from the first free practice earlier today in China. Pedro de la Rosa, no big surprises, McLaren, Mercedes. But then Rubens Barrichello for Ferrari in second place. Zonta, the test driver for Toyota, in third. Then Raikkonen, Michael, Schumacher, Montoya, 3 McLarens in the top 6. Alonso, Webber doing another good job, had a good race in Japan last weekend, and then David Coulthard and Jenson Button split by 0.07 of a second.
Well, Antonio Pizzogno in 11th place, Takuma Sato using a brand new Honda engine, Ralf Schumacher with Antonio Liuzzi is the reserve driver for Red Bull Racing, Felipe Massa in his last race for Sauber Petronas, Fisichella obviously going off in that last session, Christian Klein, Jacques Villeneuve, Jarno Trulli and Ryan Karthikeyan. But interesting to see the 2 Ferraris up there, Sasha. It kind of shows that there is a bit of pace in those Ferraris all of a sudden.